My coach asked me last month why I was still struggling with my backhand after 2 years of lessons. I gave him some excuse about timing. He picked up my racket, looked at it for a second and just said, "This thing's working against you, not for you." Turns out I'd bought a racket built for advanced players when I was still very much a beginner, because it had a famous name on it and looked the part in the shop. Nobody warned me. The racket wasn't broken, it just was never designed for someone at my level. That sent me down a proper rabbit hole researching how this entire industry actually works. And what I found changes the way you'll look at every racket on a shelf from now on. Here's the number that matters more than anything else in this video. Tennis rackets are manufactured almost entirely overseas, mostly in China, and the actual manufacturing cost for a standard racket sits between $15 and $30. That figure comes straight from manufacturing industry sourcing data. $20, maybe $25 to physically produce the racket that's sitting on a shelf for 250 pounds. Now I want to be fair, because that gap isn't pure profit sitting in someone's pocket. Brands spend real money on research, on design teams, on the engineering that goes into the frame. None of that is free, but it's also nowhere close to 200 pounds worth of cost. A large chunk of that price tag is the marketing budget, the sponsorship deals with the best players in the world, and the brand name itself doing the heavy lifting. So with that number in mind, let's go through 5 rackets that get oversold to people who don't actually need what they're paying for. And I'll back every single point with real numbers, not vibes, starting with the Babolat Pure Aero. I borrowed one off a mate for a few months while I was figuring out what to buy myself, so I've genuinely played with this racket, properly, not just held it in a shop, and it's not a bad racket. I want to be clear about that. The problem is who it's being sold to. Carlos Alcaraz uses a Pure Aero, and right now 14 players in the men's top 100 use some version of the Aero line. That's a serious chunk of the tour, and Babolat lean into that in every piece of marketing they put out. But the official guidance on this racket family is blunt about it. Beginners should not start with any of the Pure line rackets, including the Aero. They're performance frames engineered for players who already have established technique, and a newer player using one will struggle with control and can actually pick up bad habits trying to manage all that power. The Pure Strike version of the line is explicitly described as unsuitable for anyone below a 4.0 skill rating, which is genuinely an intermediate to advanced level, not a beginner one. So when I was hitting with the Pure Aero, the spin was incredible once I made clean contact, no question. But on mishits, which I was making a lot of as someone still pretty new to the sport, the racket punished me far more than my old beginner frame ever did. That's not the racket being bad. That's the racket being completely wrong for where I was at. And the 2026 version is marketed as 6% more aerodynamic with 3% more spin potential. Those are real engineering numbers, independently tested. I'm not disputing them. But they're gains that only show up once you're already generating consistent racket head speed. If you're newer to the sport, you will not feel that 3%. You'll just feel a less forgiving racket. The Pure Aero 98 bundle of 2 rackets is sitting at $619 right now. Over $300 a racket for a frame whose main selling point for most casual buyers is one name on the box. Second one, and this is where I want to correct something properly, because in an earlier version of this video, I made a claim about Wilson's manufacturing tolerances that I couldn't actually stand behind when someone pulled me up on it in the comments. They were right to call it out, so I went back and did this one properly. Wilson is one of the biggest names in tennis, full stop. Federer for over 20 years. Sampras before him. Serena and Venus Williams. That heritage is completely real, and it's exactly why the brand carries so much weight with casual buyers, myself included a year ago. The actual issue with Wilson isn't some manufacturing defect. It's how differently their lineup is positioned versus how it's marketed. Take Federer's own racket, the Pro Staff RF97. It weighs 340 grams unstrung, with a stiffness rating of 68, and it's explicitly built for advanced players only, people who can generate their own power and handle a heavy, low-powered frame. Compare that to the Wilson Clash 100, which is the racket Wilson themselves recommend for newer players. It's dramatically lighter, far more flexible with a stiffness rating around 54, and specifically designed to be forgiving and arm-friendly while you're still building technique. Those are two completely different tools built for two completely different skill levels, both wearing the same Wilson badge. And that's the actual problem. A recreational player walking into a shop, seeing Federer's name on a box, and buying the RF97 because of who uses it, is buying equipment built for a guy who trained 6 hours a day for 2 decades. Then they wonder why it feels heavy and unforgiving in their hands. The Clash, on the other hand, genuinely is a well-designed, beginner-appropriate racket. When you buy it for what it is rather than chasing a famous name on a different shelf entirely. This isn't unique to tennis, by the way. Football boots, golf clubs, basketball shoes, it's the same playbook everywhere. Sign the best player in the world, put their name on the product, let the association do the selling. Tennis just has more history behind some of these partnerships than most sports, 20, 30 years in some cases. Third one, Head. Head make genuinely well-regarded rackets. The speed and gravity lines both have a strong reputation among serious players. So this isn't about the product being poor quality. It's about how the marketing language pushes the price. Novak Djokovic has been a Head ambassador for over 15 years, and Jannik Sinner also endorses the speed line. That's the current world #1 and a Grand Slam champion, both publicly tied to one racket family, and Head's pricing reflects it, with the Speed Pro sitting above $250. Head's marketing for their newer frames describes the high-bore material in the shaft as a composite previously used in aerospace applications. That's technically accurate. Boron composites genuinely have aerospace history. But putting the word aerospace next to a tennis racket is a classic premium positioning move. It makes a recreational product sound like cutting-edge engineering when the actual on-court difference for a club-level player is marginal at best. For a sense of how far brand association alone can push price, a Djokovic autographed head racket sold at auction for over $100,000. Obviously, that's a collector's piece. Nobody's playing matches with it. But it shows you exactly how much of the value in this industry comes from the name attached rather than what the racket does on a tennis court. Fourth one is a bit different because it's not about a big brand. It's about the trap sitting at the opposite end of the price range. If you've searched for a tennis racket on Amazon, you'll know the listings I mean. Names you've never heard of: carbon fiber frame, professional grade, tournament level performance, all for $25 to $40. Here's the thing though. We already established that even the major brands manufacture for $15 to $30. So when an unknown brand is selling a complete racket for $25, including their own margin, and the retailer's margin on top of that manufacturing cost, you have to ask what's being cut to make that number work. Usually it's the carbon fiber grade and the quality control process. Established brands use a specific tested grade of carbon fiber with known performance characteristics. Ultra-budget frames use whatever's cheapest that production run, with minimal consistency checking between units. The practical result, based on what regular players and reviewers consistently report, is a racket that plays fine for the first few weeks and then starts developing dead spots in the frame, areas where the power and feel just aren't there anymore. So you replace it, then replace it again a few months later, and over a year you've spent more than if you just bought one solid mid-range racket from a recognized brand to begin with. And this is the second thing I need to correct from earlier, because I made it sound like smaller, lesser-known brands are automatically the affordable alternative to the big four. That's not actually true. Brands like Technifiber, despite being far smaller in terms of market share than Wilson or Babolat, sit in a very similar price bracket, typically $120 to $210. Smaller doesn't mean cheaper. The real divide isn't big brand versus small brand. It's whether a company is genuinely investing in materials and quality control, regardless of how famous their name is. Fifth one, limited edition, pro autographed rackets. A player wins a Grand Slam, hits some milestone, and the brand releases a special edition to market. Same frame, same internal specs as the standard version, but a different paint job, a serial number, and a printed signature on the throat. And the price often jumps significantly compared to the standard model, purely because of the cosmetic changes and the limited production run. These rackets do not perform any differently to the standard version sitting right next to the same shelf for a fraction of the cost. They're collectibles dressed up as performance equipment, and the genuine issue is that some of them end up on court with club players who've convinced themselves the signature is doing something for their game. It isn't. The frame underneath is identical to the cheaper version next to it. So where does all of this actually leave you if you're trying to buy a racket without getting caught out by any of it? Based on everything here, the real sweet spot for most recreational and intermediate players sits between $80 and $150. That's the range where you get proper graphite construction, genuine quality control, and real on-court performance without paying extra for a sponsorship deal or aerospace-themed marketing copy. For a specific recommendation, the Wilson Clash. Despite everything I said about how Wilson markets their signature line, is genuinely one of the most arm-friendly, beginner-appropriate rackets available when you buy it as what it actually is. Technofiber's mid-range options are also consistently praised by reviewers for performance that holds up against the big three, despite a fraction of the marketing spend behind them. The racket is not what's going to make you better at tennis. Court time, consistency, and proper coaching will do more for your game in a single month than any frame will do in a year. Get something solid in that $80 to $150 range. Put the rest of your budget toward lessons or just playing more, and you'll improve faster than someone who spent £300 chasing a name on the side of a frame. I'm not here to tell anyone they made a bad decision. I made exactly this mistake myself. That's literally how this video started. You live and you learn, and now you've got the actual numbers behind it instead of just the marketing. If this was useful, drop a like. It genuinely helps the video reach more people. And if you want more honest, properly researched breakdowns of sports gear without the fluff, subscribe, because that's exactly what this channel is going to keep doing.